Hey people, what's happening out there in Liberty Land? Welcome to number 4 of the Liberty Podcast. It's the 23rd of June 2016 and you're here with me, Tom Laird.
And me, Antony Sammeroff.
And I hope you've all went out there and voted. If you haven't been voted yet, get out there and do it as soon as you can. It's an important decision. I've done it. Have you done it?
I did it by post.
You did it by post.
So get out and vote leave.
Yeah, make like a tree and leave.
If you're not going to go and vote leave, polling's next week. So vote next week.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, do that. Or vote by post. Post it off today, second class. So anyway, Mr. Sammeroff, what's bugging you? What's burning your toast this week?
Well, I've got this article here from the Scotsman which says Scottish teenagers have the best attitude towards saving money.
Okay, that's got to be a new thing, because I know that when I was a teenager I wasn't all that good at saving money, I have to confess.
Young people in Scotland have the best attitude towards saving and financial planning, according to a survey. A poll of 2,000 people, wow, that's a really huge
That's a real cross-section of society.
And basically found that 2/3 of Scots consider themselves to be good at saving money, teenagers, compared to 45% of the north and east of England. Wow, this makes for a great story. You might wonder why I'm covering this.
Why are you covering this, Antony?
Well, here's a question. Is it wise to save?
Do you know what? I would think so, yeah. I mean, yeah, that would. I've always been taught that. You know, we all get the little story about the grasshopper and the whatever it was. You know,
okay.
And the beetle.
What if you're 95 years old? Is it wise to save?
It could probably still be wise. It might not be worthwhile.
Now, supposing the inflation rate had gone up to 1% a day, would it still be wise to save?
No.
Whether or not it's wise to save is really highly subjective in the time. I mean, it depends on the economic circumstances of the time and your personal circumstances. If you've got a very low income and you need food, probably not the best time to save. I would say in general it's probably wise to save.
Yeah.
The problem is the government makes it unwise to save.
Right.
And that's why I want to cover this today.
Okay.
When I was at university, I went around on Freshers' Week and there was all these banks offering interest-free overdrafts of up to £3,000. That's less than the rate of inflation. Well, obviously zero is less than the rate of inflation. Anyone would be a fool not to go into debt and take out as much interest-free overdraft, even if you're going to put that into an account to save. I wish that I knew what I knew about economics right now when I was a student, because I would have just taken that money and bought gold, and I would have made a killing over those few years.
Or property, if you could get onto the property ladder with several loans.
So my current outstanding student loans are charged at an interest rate of maybe around 1%.
Okay.
Why would I not pay that off taking the longest time I possibly could? Because every time I'm paying off my loan, I'm actually losing money. The value of the money of my student loan is going to be worth less in the future than it is now. So essentially, we're encouraging debt.
Oh, massively, yeah.
The best
even post the last economic debacle, when everything was supposed to be, we were supposed to be tightening up our belts, supposed to be austerity, banks supposed to have got their act together, but yet still they're encouraging people to take out a lot of debt.
George Bush said, go out and spend.
Yeah.
People don't really understand the purpose of interest rates. Also, when the interest rates are low and you're discouraging people from saving, you're actually maybe making it more difficult for people who want to borrow a loan to make a business from getting credit. There's less money being saved, therefore there's less credit available to loan. Even admitting that the banks can loan out 9 times as much money as they actually have in savings. So on a free market, which we haven't had for a long time when it comes to interest rates. An interest rate is a price. It's the price of borrowing money. If a lot of people are saving, then the interest rate comes down because there's lots of money around, and that would encourage people to save less, but also to borrow more money to invest in projects, invest in capital investments, buy factories, buy machines, invest in research, invest in businesses. If hardly anyone is saving, then the price of borrowing money goes up, which encourages people not to spend, but to go, look, the interest rates are really high. I should be setting some money aside in order to take advantage of high interest rates. The problem with the government giving the Bank of England here and the Federal Reserve the power to set interest rates is that this has become completely divorced from a rational mechanism that acts as a counterbalance and can create equilibrium between the number of savers and spenders. Instead, the central planners at the central banks have to guess what the best interest rate will be. And their guess will never be impartial. It will always be partisan. Because whenever you adjust the interest rates, there's winners and losers.
Yeah.
Everyone who's got a mortgage is going to benefit, favouring people who've already got some capital, already got some property. But that will push more money into the housing market because it's cheap to get a mortgage, which will mean that the house prices goes up. People who've been responsible and put money away are going to lose the value of that money.
Yeah.
So there's lots of unintended consequences to having the government via the Bank of England. I know they're meant to be divorced, they're meant to be a countervailing force, but essentially the problem is, whether it's the Bank of England or the government, the purpose of interest rates is lost. The purpose of interest rates is meant to be the price of borrowing money, and that is meant to affect or be affected by real circumstances in the economy. In other words, the law of supply and demand. Since that started being centrally planned, that function is divorced. Most people don't even think about this. They don't even understand the function of interest rates, why they're important, and why the Bank of England should not be centrally planning them, which is essentially communistic.
As we're talking about it right now, what would you say the solution is to this? What would make it worthwhile for these guys, the youngsters? I mean, you're saying they're saving now. Are you saying they're foolish to do that? It would be better if they spent than saved?
Well,
and what's the reason? Why do you think young people are saving?
I think that people don't feel like the future's secure. And I don't think that young people are foolish to save. In an ideal world, they would be able to put that money maybe in the stock market and get a better return on their investment. But because there's so much manipulation of the economy coming from the government, such as the central planning of interest rates, such as the government can print money at any time it likes, well, the Bank of England can, it's insecure to invest in the stock market. What's more, if we didn't have the government interfering in the interest rates and being able to print money at any time it wanted, there would be no need for these young people to invest in the stock market. There would be no need for everyone to have their retirement money in the stock market. The stock market was originally intended for people who know about business to invest in businesses. Because if you leave your money sitting in the bank, the rate of inflation is so high that it's basically going to lose money. There's no point saving. That means that people are coerced into putting their retirement money into the stock market, and that supercharges the stock market and means that when there's a crash such as we saw in 2008, it's much greater than it would be if regular people could just save in the bank, because the interest rate they're getting from the bank is much higher than the rate of inflation, and the bank's going to have experts that are much better at investing that money than, say, the layperson or one of these agencies are. Yeah.
So saving in of itself doesn't necessarily need to be a good thing. It just depends on the economic circumstances at the time.
Saving is probably generally wise, but the extent to which people make the decision to save will be affected by economic circumstances, which is why I think it's so awful that central planning has removed the natural incentives to save via the central banks, which, you know, no one really on the left talks about, and it's really a fringe of what we call the right. It's more libertarians that talk about it. There might be some conservatives in America who talk about it. Certainly you don't hear any conservatives in this country, and I include UKIP and conservatives, who are talking about the importance of divorcing the state from the economy in this way.
Yeah.
So my solution is we shouldn't just have one currency, one national currency. People should be able to trade with whatever they want, and that will stop the manipulations of interest rates affecting everything that anyone might trade well.
Yeah, but, you know, people will come up and say, well, you know, the whole reason we've got a centralised bank in the first place is because, you know, it was a complete disaster when we had competing currencies and we had different banks competing with one another. We had runs on banks. The whole reason for a centralised bank is to make the economy more secure so that people's savings are safe from runs on banks. That's generally what people would come back at you with, I think. Well, I'm not saying I buy it, but
yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, are you more secure and safe from a run in the bank if there's only one banking system to choose from? There was a Bank of Glasgow that went bankrupt before the government agreed to insure depositors, and no depositors lost their money. The investors might have, but they were insured against that. They had insurance against things going badly. So even though the bank went bankrupt, the depositors got their money. When it was the idea to create this artificial thing which is created by the government called a corporation, which protects people in that corporation from liability, and they wanted to apply that to the banking system, a lot of bankers were against it because they said, no, this is going to cause corruption and so forth. And I will link to a great presentation on this in the video description. So basically, banks should have to insure themselves against these kinds of instances, which they don't have to do at the moment because the government underwrites people's deposits. And if they didn't do that on a free market, then less people would be likely to bank with them. Yeah.
You know, there's always that fear or sneaky suspicion that you could save up a whole lot of savings, and suddenly one day you go to the bank and find out that you've got £10,000 in the bank, but £10,000 basically what a loaf of bread is. so you've saved up for years. Congratulations, you can buy a loaf of bread now with our new worthless currency.
And that may well happen if people don't understand the consequences of printing money.
Okay. Caveat emptor.
Let's move on.
Okay, let's move on. You may or may not have heard, but Donald Trump, the Don, is visiting this green and pleasant land of Scotland. He's coming, apparently he's due to be here tomorrow.
Wow.
And he's going to visit, obviously, Turnberry Golf Course that he's invested in, and his new golf course in Aberdeen. And there's a lot of people up there putting up Mexican flags for some reason. Basically, they're showing solidarity with the Mexican people who Trump has slighted. Look, Trump's just said he's going to build a wall. I don't think he will. He said he's going to build a wall, but of all the things that people could say, I don't really think it's that bad. It's not like he ate a baby, live on television. Maybe a stupid thing to say, but I don't think it's really that bad in the scale of things. But anyway, there's a lot of people here not in favour of him coming. The First Minister, as you know, Nicola Sturgeon, wanted to ban Trump from Scotland and from the United Kingdom.
Illiberal. The SNP are the worst party on civil liberties.
Yeah.
By the way, Donald Trump is not exactly great on civil liberties.
No, he's not. He ain't no libertarian, bruv. No. He's very protectionist. He's got a lot of weird ideas, but I think he's got the right to,
he's got the right to visit.
He's got the right to visit. He's got, this is a woman, by the way. Nicola Sturgeon is fond of putting up hashtags, holding up hashtags for any bloody thing, at the drop of a hat. And the last one I seen her holding up was "We have room here," but apparently she doesn't have room for Donald Trump whatsoever because she doesn't like what he says. Now, full kudos, right, to J.K. Rowling on this. Did you see her statement? Talk about J.K. Rowling, the author, right? I'm not talking about Robin Vagrant Alcoholics. J.K. Rowling has said that Trump is welcome to come to her country, and not because she agrees with him, she disagrees with almost everything that he says, but he's got a right to say it. He's a right to be bigoted, if indeed that's what he is, and she's then got a right to call him out on it. The right for him to say what he wants defends the right for her to call him a bigot. But to prevent him from coming to the UK based on something, where
does that stop? Isn't he?
Well, exactly.
What's the difference between him saying, "Oh, don't want this Mexican to come in," and us saying, "Well, I don't want this Donald Trump to come in"?
Well, it doesn't. It seems to be exactly the same to me. A lot of these people. I mean, I'm putting Nicola Sturgeon on the left. She wants to prevent this guy coming here because she doesn't agree with him. Well, UKIP doesn't want certain people to come to the United Kingdom because they don't agree with him. The National Front don't want certain people to come to Britain because they don't agree with him. I think if you look at some of the people that we have admitted to the UK, there's people out there who said we shouldn't have allowed the Pope to come to the UK because he's got some views on homosexuality, he's got some views on marriage, he's got some views on a lot of subjects that aren't exactly fashionable.
Let's be tolerant. I'd actually quite like to go and see him speak just for the fucking momentous occasion, if that's what he was doing. I don't think he's doing it this time.
I don't know if he's doing any speaking. I don't think he's going to have a lot of time. I think he's just doing the old in and out.
Yeah. Will there not be egg on her chin if
he actually gets elected president?
If he actually gets elected, and then these people actually have to work with him.
Yeah, good luck on banning the president of the United States from Scotland. Yeah, is this just a case of? I mean, because at one time the SNP were all over this guy. They thought he was great because he was bringing investment. I'm sure Alex Salmond was very matey with him at one point, and weren't they pretty much against that guy who wouldn't sell Donald Trump his land for him to build his big theme park? 18-hole crazy golf course, whatever it is he's doing up there.
Well, it's all virtue signalling. If someone said something vaguely controversial, and I guess the things that Donald Trump said were quite controversial, but they were massively taken out of context to make him sound worse than he did.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about Mexicans was, apparently he said that Mexicans are rapists. If you look at the whole speech, he was basically saying that a subset of the people that came in were criminal. And yes, if you look at the stats, actually there were a lot of rapes of women in the immigration. He wasn't saying that all Mexicans were rapists. You'd think that he had, based on the reporting of it. What's more, the thing he said about Muslims, okay, I don't really agree, but he said that we should ban all Muslim immigration until we get a grip on this thing. Yeah. We get a grip on this terrorism thing. Now, is that the worst position ever? I mean, I wouldn't support it, but basically he's saying we have a national crisis. I don't think it is as big a crisis as the Conservatives, the Republicans in America en masse seem to think it is, because given there's billions of Muslims in the world, I think if it was a crisis there would be suicide bombs every day. Yeah. There's enough of them. So it's I don't think the size of the crisis justifies that. But supposing it were a crisis, that might actually be an expedient position. So it's something that should be debated. It's something that should be reasoned with. Is it a measured response? I don't think it is, but that's something that Trump should be debated on. He shouldn't just be called a racist for saying it. No,
but it's interesting when you mentioned tolerance. There's something that's actually called liberty tolerance. When you dissect it, it doesn't sound, and it's nothing to do with liberty, but it's called liberty tolerance. And like a lot of things like this that came out of the Frankfurt Schule, right. Frankfurt schools were like Herbert Marcuse and a lot of these left-wing Marxist,
Walter Benjamin.
Yeah. And yep, what these guys said was, well, liberty tolerance is about fighting for tolerance for your point of view and your ideas, and making sure that your ideas are tolerated by the state and by everybody else. However, under no circumstances should any opposing viewpoint to yours, i.e. the Marxist worldview, leftist worldview, on no circumstances should that be tolerated in any way, shape or form. So actually liberty tolerance is the antithesis of tolerance, and the people who most bang on usually about tolerance are some of the least intolerant people that I've ever met in my life.
Well, I mean, completely disagreeing with the Frankfurt school's Marxism, having read some of their stuff, there's a lot of really interesting and insightful observations some of the writers had about society. That notwithstanding, I mean, the philosopher Karl Popper, who was the philosopher of science, I think his views on the philosophy of science are excellent, helpful, and have been widely adopted. He was one of the people who said that tolerance of intolerance was damaging to what he called an open society. And he wasn't on the left either.
Right.
He actually has been called reactionary. I think that's just by Marxists who think that anything right of, I don't know, Marx is right wing. I think the main essay was that Michael Walzer, is that the guy you're talking about?
It could be.
Should we tolerate the intolerant, was a big influence and has been widely sort of adopted as the modus operandi of the left, at least on campus, which is culminated in what we call the social justice warrior movement, which has only really reached a head in the last few years. I mean, I remember 5-6 years ago, I wasn't fearful of posting the kind of things that I'm fearful of posting now. And I thought this was an American phenomenon, but I've spoken to some university professors in Edinburgh or in Glasgow who say this is a real problem on the campus now with having to issue... Massive. I don't know if trigger warnings, but you know, it's the safe spaces and stuff like that. And is there any evidence for this? I mean, isn't university where you go to be challenged? So should you have to tolerate intolerant people? No! You don't have to hang out with them. Yeah. You don't have to buy their product.
Social sanctions.
You can ignore them if you want. I think it's better to debate them. Yeah. I mean, I know the idea of, look, I'm not even going to debate you because your views are so ridiculous. We had so much of that during the Brexit referendum where people were just calling you a xenophobe or a right-winger or this or that. And that really derails the argument. I think people need to be equipped with the tools to say that's not an argument. Yeah. Let's get into the reasoning side. Let's get into the evidence. And they're just not. They're not equipped for that.
No, the whole reason I think they call it liberty tolerance is because it takes serious liberties with the meaning of the word tolerance. But anyhow, Donald Trump, welcome to Scotland, but don't be a dick. Yeah. So that's all I've got to say on Donald Trump. Okay, trigger warning.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah, trigger warning. If there are any feminists out there, male or female, you're going to hear some serious mansplaining coming up. The reason we're getting into this territory is I read a review of a book at the weekend in the Sunday Times, and the book is called Pimp State. And then the review is by Eleanor Mills. She's the editor of the Sunday Times Culture magazine. She was also for a while, I think, the editor at Times on Saturday, but she didn't spend long there. She went back to the Sunday Times for whatever reason. But she's read this book called Pimp State, and it's subtitled Sex, Money and the Future of Equality, and it's by somebody called Kat Banyard. Kat Banyard is very much a feminist. There's a picture of her there, and she looks like a feminist. She's got those specs on they don't look so much like specs as contact lenses with frames. But I'm saying she looks like a feminist. Janice Fiumenko looks like a feminist. Karen Strawn looks like a feminist, but they're anything but. But anyhow, she is the founder of Feminista UK, a feminist organisation, and she's also the proud recipient of both Justice for Men and Boys and A Voice for Men's Lying Feminist of the Year award, right? Which is it's quite a lofty title. So red flags right away for me before I even read this. Now, what interested me about it, basically the book is about prostitution, the sex industry, lap dancing, porn. But the thing about that article is she hasn't at any point said, okay, it's a good polemic, but she's left the door open here. She hasn't really covered that properly. It's a bit simplistic. There's no detraction from it. There's no critique whatsoever on that. So either this woman, what's her name in Banyard, has
infallibility.
I mean, she could be the next pope. She's either written a book that is absolutely perfect. She's written the perfect polemic on this subject, or Eleanor Mills, you just haven't critiqued it. All you've done is decided that this is... Maybe it fits with her
I
think it does already fit with her pre-existing views, which is fine, but say that.
Say that, yeah.
And I remember reading a book by Brooke Magnanti, PhD. Now that name might not ring a bell to most people, but if I tell you that her other name is Belle de Jour, the famous, sort of high-class prostitute who they turned into a TV series starring Billy Piper. She wrote a book, a non-fictional book called The Sex Myth, in which she exploded a lot of these myths surrounding the sex industry, that all women who were involved in the sex industry were exploited and it was terrible and yada yada. Now, don't get me wrong. First of all, let me say here, I am sure there are lots of women, right? Maybe even it's the majority, I don't know, in the sex industry who are having a horrific time in terms of violence, in terms of exploitation. I'm sure it goes on. But it's not everybody. But anyway, I'm just going to read you a bit of this review. And right from the start it says, the most chilling aspect of 2016's Oscar-winning film Spotlight about the uncovering of large-scale sexual abuse in the Catholic Church in Boston was how the whole scandal was right under the journalists' noses, hiding in plain sight. People knew. So right out the gate, Eleanor Mills here is equating men who use the sex industry as the same as paedophiles. It's a scandal on that scale, okay? It's what she's insinuating. She goes on to say that this is a barnstorming polemic about porn and lap dancing and prostitution. And just as we now can't believe that domestic violence was once condoned, who condoned domestic violence? In the past? I don't understand what she means by that. I don't remember anybody actually saying it was a good thing to beat your wife. I've never heard it in my lifetime. Men who do say that or do practice it are generally shunned by most decent men that I know. So I don't know whoever condoned violence against women. But anyway, the book goes on. I haven't read this book, I have to say. And I thought to myself when I was going to do this, I thought, look, do I do this and actually give this woman publicity? Is there any other way to do it? And I think, well, no. And the difficulty I have is you can guarantee that Cat Banyard's a good name because she's full of shit actually, but anyway, Cat Banyard, well, it's actually B-A-N Yard, right? But I'm not going to let that go and get in the way of a good gag, right? But anyway, she's going to go on Loose Women, she's going to go on Women's Hour on Radio 4, she's going to go on Newsnight, and nobody is going to call her out. Everybody's just going to take what she says right off the bat. And let's suppose I went out there to make a book about how the building trade was terrible and it should be banned, right? We shouldn't have a building industry because people are grossly exploited in it. I could go to Dhofar and I could go to Dubai and I could go to China and I could find massive exploitation, slave labour, people working in horrific conditions and say, look, that's what the building industry is, it should be banned immediately. I don't think that that's a reflective view on exactly what it is. There are thousands of people who work in the building industry and that's not their experience. So you can look for the worst aspects of anything and use it to back up your argument.
For me, I think the important point with that is the fact that it's illegal makes those conditions more likely. Drugs are illegal, so if you want to get drugs, you might have to go to a dodgy alleyway, right?
Yeah.
If it's not illegal, then there is competition and workers seeking employers. They can be self-employed. A few girls can work together in the same apartment, which is completely illegal at the moment because that's considered a brothel, whereas actually it's safer for the sex workers to actually just rent a flat.
They wouldn't think twice about phoning the police if there was anybody giving them any hassle.
Exactly. Now, you can't check the back of the car to see if there's someone else in there or a weapon. You just need to get in as quickly as possible and, buzz off, because if you get busted, you're in trouble. And I think that most of the abuses are because these things grow in the dark. They're illegal, they're shady, and if they weren't, then people would be able to get access to better conditions and better treatment, more safety. You don't have to approve of prostitution. I personally cannot see the appeal of going to a prostitute. I've never wanted to do it. I'm not even one of these people who'd go, oh well, it's not me, but I'm in Amsterdam, I'll just try it for once. Personally, I don't see the appeal. But I think that making it illegal is going to create more problems than it solves. And on the libertarian principle, I am a voluntarist. Yeah. It's a voluntary contract between a man and a woman, and it's none of my business, even if I do disapprove.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're a religious person and you have a view in prostitution for faith reasons, I can't argue with you. That's your view, and you may be right. Just don't go to prostitutes if that's how you feel. But there's the reason I mentioned Belle de Jour, because she wrote a robust sort of defence of the sex industry and called it sex work. And this woman, Kat Banyard, has a horror of calling it sex work and a horror of calling them sex workers, because she thinks that normalises it and makes it just sound like any other trade, which it's not. Now, Banyard says here she's a passionate advocate of the Nordic model of policing prostitution, where the punters are criminalised but the women are not. Now, and it says here,
the Swedish model.
Yeah, the sex buyer law, first introduced in Sweden in 1999. Now, if you think prostitution should be illegal, okay, you have a point, you have an argument. Why not do both, the person who's selling and the person who's buying? But no, I don't think anybody would seriously say, when it comes to drugs, we should arrest the buyer but not the pusher. Right?
But they have a view, which is that the woman is in the more powerless situation and that they are for the victims, whereas they see the dealer in the more powerful situation and therefore not the victim.
But then not every dealer is in a powerful position. Some dealer might be working for another dealer who's more powerful than him, who forces him to do it.
Is only dealing because they've not got any options, the same way as the woman might not have any options. My personal view is that being against prostitution largely comes from a feeling of ugh, I don't like it. I would not like to personally be in that position, and therefore no one should be in that position. It's from a feeling of disapprobation. Okay. It comes out of a feeling of disapprobation.
No, this isn't disapprobation what you do when you can't get laid.
It comes out of a sense of disapprobation, which is then justified with reasoning. I mean, we've got this article in The Guardian from about a year and a half ago that says, Amnesty International says prostitution is a human right, but it's wrong. Now, this feminist, and I should add, there's a lot of feminist groups that are for decriminalisation as well, but many of them are against it, and they're against it because they think it's some kind of patriarchal act. Mm-hmm. Now, this particular feminist thinks she knows better than Amnesty International, who actually researched and got experts in to find out what their position should be. Yeah. And they found out that the model that's in place in New Zealand is the best in the world, and they've decriminalised, and that's what they're advocating. They found that what goes on in Sweden makes things worse for prostitutes. Well, because they've got so many less clients, the clients can now come and offer them less money.
Well, hang on, she rebuts this, right? She says street prostitution halved between 1999 and 2008, and the proportion of men who pay for sex dropped from 12.7% to 7.6%. Now, how do you arrive at that figure? I don't really know. They don't give you any reason that they managed to arrive at that figure, that men who pay for sex dropped. I don't know. I just think they're going elsewhere.
They might be going elsewhere. It might be too dangerous, but the women who are still in it need to admit more dangerous conditions for work, and what's more, they can't gain the same income that they would because the supply is restricted. Yeah. Less people are going, and now these buyers can bargain and give them less cash. But quite apart from the fact, if it could be fully decriminalised, this is a choice that someone might make in order to make a lot of money for not doing very much work in terms of time constraints. It's something that creates a sense of disapprobation in most of us. Most of us wouldn't want to do it, but there's a percentage of people who make that choice, just the same as the percentage of people who do very, very dangerous jobs for a higher income. Now, if that's what they want to choose, that's their right, and the government interfering with them is not allowing people to make a free decision about what they want to do with their body. I mean, feminists say, my body, my choice. I completely agree with them. It's her body, it's her choice. If you want to help, then by all means, join a charity, do education, pay people not to be prostitutes, whatever you want, but don't use the gun of the state to go around telling people what they can and cannot do in a voluntary interaction, because you making it illegal for everyone is making it illegal to that percentage of people who much prefer their job to what they'd find completely boring working in Tesco's. And it's not all arseholes who go. It might be a really lonely person, it might be a really short person,
really ugly person, a disabled person.
A disabled person. There's some people who've had the kind of childhoods where they're so insecure that they've never been able to chat up a girl, and they're too nervous because they're 30-something and they've never lost their virginity. And having someone who's just, they might need physical touch, they might need that kind of comfort. They might not be a lad, they might just need someone to sit beside them and touch them and be with them. And making it illegal for everyone is making it illegal for them.
Well, I'm sure Banyard would say something like, "Oh, boo-hoo, you know, these poor guys." But it's nothing compared to what the women go through. And I think what she ends up saying, it is wrong. The Nordic model is the best way to stamp it out. Privileged sex workers of the Belle de Jour ilk might argue that it victimises women who make their choices freely, but I challenge anyone to read this book and not feel there is something profoundly immoral and wrong about all of this, and it's there in plain sight. Well, I mean, I don't know.
She's a conservative.
Well, there's this weird alliance between like religious conservatives and, you know, left-wing feminists. It's bizarre. But here's the thing I was going to say. I'm sure this horrific thing's going on. And she talks about trafficking as well. As far as I know, the vast majority of people who are trafficked are men, and they're trafficked for hard labour. Are you honestly telling me that somebody who's worked to death in the blazing sun in Dubai or Dhofar or one of these places is somehow better off than a woman who's working in a brothel under terrible conditions? I don't know, you could probably make a case that at least a brothel's going to be clean in some instances. You know, you're inside, out of the sun or the rain or whatever it is. But yeah, I don't think a guy who's worked to death is any worse off any better off than a woman that's in the sex industry. Nobody's saying that anybody should be forced. Nobody's saying that anybody should be coerced. But I think we could free up the police to do that job more effectively if we decriminalised.
And also, because it's in the light, I mean, you'll hear a lot of anti-sex work advocates saying, oh, it opens the door for child prostitution and so forth. Well, that's why we need to shine a light on it. That's why we need to bring this industry out of dark alleyways and into the light where it can be policed according to the needs of a legal industry.
My sort of final word on this is, I mean, you probably disagree with me. I think there's something deeper than just an icky feeling about sex, you know, and I think that men's demand, alright, they might not like the word demand, men's requirement for sex is legitimate. You know, it's a legitimate requirement. And if you're, like we've said, if you're disabled, if you're hideously disformed, you know, you kind of need, as I say, it might just be human touch as well that you need. And where do they go? How do they get it? But I think there's something deeper here. With feminists of the Banyard type, I think it's really about barrier to entry. Okay, bad turn of phrase. Barrier to access. If you control money, you control people. Baron, is it Amstel Rothschild that said, if you give me the power to issue and control a nation's currency, I care not who makes the laws. If you control money, you control governments. If you control food, you control people. Game, set, match. If you control sex and the access to sex, you can effectively control men. How else do you access that? You know, unless you're a good little boy and you sit up and beg and you roll over and do exactly what you're told when you're told, you won't get access to the cookie jar. So that, and I think this is really what the extreme feminists problem
Do you
is
think they
with the
know
sex
that
industry.
consciously, or they're unconsciously motivated?
Well, I'm not saying that Banyard
Because-
doesn't genuinely care about the plight of
because
some of the sex
No, I
workers.
just-
I
yeah.
think that she does. But I think there's a wider... Do I think it's conscious? I think it is conscious on the part of some of them, yeah.
I would say, if that is true, it's unconscious. I mean, one of the things that feminists legitimately complain about as a social pressure on women is not to sleep around, whereas, you know, a man's can often be measured by how many women he can sleep with. A woman's measured by how many men she's not sleeping with.
Yeah.
But I think that pressure comes more from other women, and in this instance, I can see that on some unconscious level, women might feel like, oh, well, she's being a slut. That's making vaginas more available, and that's bad sexual economics for us because that lowers the value of my vagina. I'm not sure if I agree with you on this prostitution thing, but it's definitely a point worth considering.
Well, you know the old adage, you know, they are the lock keepers, you know, and a lock that can be opened by any key is a shite lock, whereas a key that can open any lock is a fucking master key, you know. And it's like, you know, so the women are the gatekeeper. They decide who does and who doesn't sleep with them. It's women who generally make the decision about whether sex is going to take place or not. Well, it is with me.
Are you saying that men propose, women dispose?
Well, that's a good turn of phrase. Did you come up with it?
No, it was Stefan Molyneux, that well-known misogynist.
Okay.
Anyway,
that's all I've got to say on the...
I want to pick up one point.
Sure, okay.
Just on this lady who wrote this book.
Yeah, Eleanor Mills, lady. Yeah.
Did you say this?
It's not all right, Lady Eleanor.
She said, I challenge anyone to read this book and not feel there is something profoundly immoral and wrong about all of this, and it is there in plain sight. Well, firstly, feelings are not tools of cognition.
There you go with your mansplaining, Mr. Sammeroff. Right, you know, feelings are what it's all about. Don't you know that? None of your patriarchal facts and reason and evidence. Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay. Well, 2 points. First of all, feelings are not tools of cognition.
Right, okay. Says you, Mr. Man.
The only thing that feelings tell you are your values. Okay. What you value. They have personal significance, they have psychological significance, and they have social significance. As in interpersonal significance. Okay. As in, if you get annoyed about something when we're debating, hopefully I care more about you being annoyed than being right, and we can sort that out and then continue with the debate. If I don't care about your feelings, then we're probably not going to get on in the long term, or vice versa. But that wasn't my main point. My main point is, she says, you can't help but feel there's something profoundly immoral and wrong about all of this. And I said, so she's a conservative. Because I think one of the really important distinctions between conservatives and libertarians is conservatives believe in imposing their morality on society.
Yep. That's
where they differ from the left, and that's where they differ from us. And I think it's really important, if we're to break out of the left-right paradigm, or even if we apply it against our enemies, people need to start calling out conservative views as conservative. Yeah. And when a so-called liberal or a socialist starts saying something like that, people need to go, you're being conservative.
Yeah.
So with that,
be
libertarians. Don't be a lefty or a righty.